Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Council Planning Committee meeting. We'll start off, we'll go around the room. We've got Councillor Elliott, Councillor Passelt, Alderman Bloomfield, Councillor Lohberger, Councillor Dudder, Councillor Harvey, the Deputy Lord Mayor, and we have Alderman Zuko on Zoom. Just to start off with, confirmation of the minutes from the previous meeting. Councillor Dudder, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried. Consideration of supplementary items. I don't think we have any. No. Very good. Indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interest. No. Transfer of agenda items. Going once. No. Okay, and then part 5, consideration of items of deputations. Somebody want to move that?
So moved.
Thank you, Deputy. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. Okay, now committee is now acting as a planning authority. Our first item is 6.1.1. Oh no, wait, sorry, that's not correct. First item is 6.1.3, 175 Campbell Street, and we have a deputation from Mr. Dean Coleman, Mr. Peter Walker, and Mr. Grant Atherton. If you guys wanted to come up to that little table at the front there and pull the microphones up as close as you're able to. Okay, so you guys will have 5 minutes to present, and we'll give you a warning at 30 seconds, and then we'll have some questions for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the time again today. I might have to call myself Dean Boomerang Common. I'll come back a lot on this one, but over the time since we last caught up, we have sent some further information through, and we feel that we have a very strong solution to the flooding issue as a warning system. We feel that the development is a standout development for North Hobart, and as per the correspondence I sent through to all the councillors, I wanted to include the letters from Langford CEO Nick Connor and also Possibility CEO Drew Beswick on the work that we've been doing with them on the NDIS SDA accommodation which we have on the ground floor for this development. We are doing a number of projects for those two groups across Tasmania and in Victoria. We're very focused on making sure that we can get this project up. I'm going to get Grant to talk with regards to the flooding aspect and to make a few points about the reports that have been put in previously, and also get Peter to talk on the architectural form. What we would really like to do is to make sure that the solutions that you hear, and also when you look at the correspondence that the council officers have sent us, that we're very valid in asking for requests for a DA approval conditioned to move forward, because this is such a vital project for Hobart. So, Grant, on the water side?
Yeah, thanks, Dean. So to make this easy, given the time constraints, I've basically going to refer to page numbers from the agenda. So starting at page 219, under 7.4, end of the second paragraph. Even if a detailed flood emergency plan could be developed, there would be a problem enacting the plan, as the time required to enact the plan would be far longer than the flood response time. That shows a misunderstanding of the warning system that we're talking about. What they're thinking there is that nothing happens until the flooding starts. What we're talking about, and there was a whole host of information submitted that's available from the Bureau of Meteorology in terms of their early warnings, for both thunderstorms and severe weather warnings, which are at a minimum 1 hour notice. So it's not a reactive plan, it's a proactive plan with BOM, other warnings, observation used to trigger the plan in advance. He then goes on to, or the discussion says, it's reasonable to assume a person could be located within the basement car park at the onset of flooding. That's not a reasonable assumption if there's a flood emergency management plan in place. On page 228 of the agenda, it states that there, quote, there is no disputing that a robust early warning system would be effective. And that's exactly what we've been trying to get across, is that it's not waiting till the water coming into the car park. We're closing down a minimum 30 minutes in advance of any risk. All sorts of things have been talked about in terms of the technology we can use, but we've also got full-time on-site managers that can sweep the car park. Interestingly, the agenda talks about comparisons with 225 to 227 Harrington Street, which is the Bethlehem House building. And there's a few things I'd like to correct in there, because I was actually the author of the approved flood management summary plan on that one. But just on page 222, if you wouldn't mind going to the last paragraph above 7.1. And we got a bit hung up on this at the end of the December meeting. The potential for facing liability is not a consideration which is relevant to the discretions which are called up by the planning scheme, and this should not form part of an elected member's decision-making process. We then get into the habitable space definition, with a slight difference between the Hobart planning scheme definition
You've
and
got 30 seconds left.
Sorry?
Seconds left, you can just wrap up.
Yeah, okay. So if we've got 30 seconds, maybe throw to Peter. You good? So even if it's considered as a habitable room, there is a performance solution which comes back to the risk. If the risk is managed, and your own document says that it can be managed if there's a robust early warning system in place, that's the key thing in this whole shooting match. We're happy to work with council, with whoever consultants you want to work with, as a condition of the DA approval.
Thanks a lot. We'll go to questions. Who's got questions? So can you just walk us through the management plan there for when there is a flood incident? Just sort of.
Yeah, so I'll do that in two ways, and one is to refer to the requirements from council on the Bethlehem House project. So this is a definite requirement before building endorsement, a condition endorsement could be approved by council under the Building Act 2016. So blah, 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 blah. 3, a flood management summary plan from a suitably qualified and experienced expert that outlines the obligations for future property owners to flood and overland flow management, including the flood risk to the site, including time to inundation, frequency and depth, extent and hazard ratings for the 1% AEP at 2100 event. 2, the flood risk to the site, blah, 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 in a 5% AEP event. 3, identification of all measures to maintain and maximise the overland flow path through the site and their maintenance. 4, identification of all flood management measures and their required maintenance, including an emergency escape plan. All work required by this permit must be undertaken and maintained in accordance with the approved detailed drawings and report. Then there's an advice, and this is probably the key to consider. Advice. This condition requires further information to be submitted as a condition endorsement. Refer to the condition endorsement advice at the end of this permit. The flood management summary plan is not a flood study, but rather a plain English document summarising risk and actions required by a future site manager. And that's why we've been stressing all the time that this site has a 24/7 site management presence, because they've got to be there to implement the plan.
I suppose my question. Yeah, I suppose it was more to, like, I say I'm a resident that's living in that building, and I happen to be down, I don't know, cleaning up my car when an event happens. What's the process to make sure that the car park's safe?
On that side, because there's 31 apartments there, there's a centralised MATV and intercom system, so guests to the building ring, via security, get access to the lifts to go up. But that also would have an input into it from the Bureau of Meteorology, which is sending out the warnings before any water goes into the car park, before a rain event happens, to say that an audible alarm, exactly the same as emergency, leave the building now, which is the fire signals to most properties. It's the same. Car park is closing, flood event may be evident, and so that goes through. Then you've got the building manager on the site who lives in the front Campbell Street abode. He is going around through. But this is all prior to the events happening. And the document that I sent showed last week that Friday the Mercury ran a story at 1:47 p.m. about the pending downpour on the east coast, and there was pending flooding. Now that flooding didn't occur, but that was given 4 hours before that event came.
Did you have anything else to say?
Yeah, so going back to you're there in the car park getting something out of your car, and the management plan is triggered. So basically there'd be visual and audible signals, so warning siren and announcement, as Dean's talked about. There'd be flashing lights. There'd also be the access to the car park would be limited by a cable gate, so that when that goes up, you can't go in or out of the car park area. And then there would be the physical sweep of the car park by the building manager. So
another person wouldn't be able to go, oh no, I've left my work gear and my laptop in my car, I need to go run down and get it before I evacuate. They just wouldn't be able to get into the car park. Is that what you're saying?
The car park could still be accessible because it's porous, because we can't divert the flow of water. But we're talking about the car park being closed, and then making sure the building management team making sure nobody goes there well and truly before. This is the key fundamental of it, before an event. And for the event to happen, and when you look through both Pitt Sherry's report and the two reports that have been done by FLUSIG and JMG, for the event to happen, we're talking about a deluge of rain, which is about 24 inches in a short period of time. Nobody be going out. You won't be able to drive on the road. You wouldn't be able to visually see. So, this is well and truly before that's happened.
Any other Councillor Harvey and then Councillor
Thanks, Chair. So, draw me a picture of what happens when there's a big rainfall event. How does the car park perform? How deep can water potentially go in the car park, and how does it drain?
Well, at the moment, the one really important thing for this particular site is that the car park that exists at the back of the Campbell Street property is exactly the same level that the car park will be in the new structure. The stormwater main runs underneath that, and so far in its 45-year history, it's never had any water seep out of that. But in the event that water may get to that site, it has been modelled that it's 8.5 minutes before it gets to a level which is deemed unsafe for humans being in the space. So 8.5 minutes before, that you have to get out, but the warning system would have gone off a number of hours before that, even if it went off with 1 minute or 30 seconds. Like fire alarms are instantaneous because it's got to detect fire, so you've got to get out of the building. The same warning systems are going to be put in place here. But, part of the reason we're really pushing for it to be conditionally based, DA, is that the drawings, like these systems aren't unique. Like the Hobart City Council has in the rivulet a sensor that's monitored by Insurer. Problem with that is, I have to say, is that it's probably too high, because when we had the last 1 in 100-year flood here, when the water broke at the bottom of Campbell Street and went down to Constitution Docks, that warning system is about 1.5 metres above where the rivulet normally is at. So, if it was put lower, and we would quite happily put our own monitors in, but there's a little bit of a problem with being able to do that. But they don't need power. They have solar cells and SMS cards in them that send out a text message. But the systems that are done by a number of, right around the world, like Australia, that are in place, working fine. A good example where there's been a bit of a failure on the data coming back was the recent flooding in Melbourne, where the Maribyrnong River breached its banks. The warning system was in place, and that notified everybody 3 days in advance of the event happening. But what was wrong there was their modelling numbers that they said it would get to 3.2 metres. It actually got to 4.2. So people who put their belongings above, only at 3.2 metres lost them all. But that flooding reached its 4.2 3 days after the warning. So again, there is just so much feedback, and we're not saying that with the Pitt and Sherry report and for the officers that they're wrong, we're right, we're wrong, they're right. We want to work with them just to put the solution in place, because it's so important for the development of properties within that Campbell Street catchment, because they all have the same issue running down the back of the grassed area behind Brooker Avenue.
So what depth of water could you anticipate in a really bad event? The water in the basement would get to, in the car park would get to?
Yeah, so in the Flusig reports, they modelled it based on the 1% AEP flood, plus they allowed 30% increase for climate change through to 2100. Recently, Council is now accepting 16% through to 2090, and then if you extrapolate that to 2100, you get to about 18%.
So what's the depth of that? 5 metres or 4 metres?
I think it was just in excess of 2 metres at the worst.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Councillor Dutta?
Thank you, Chair. Through you. A reference was made to Bethlehem House. Would you agree that the Bethlehem House development had a lower risk of Category 3 in comparison to this one, which is categorized in Category 5, and therefore there's a greater risk?
I'm so glad you asked that one. So, in fact, while the agenda says that Bethlehem House was hazard category H3, in the Flusig engineers report, it clearly states that there are areas of H4. In my flood summary report, which was accepted by Council after 6 revisions, I identified there's actually an area of H5 in that development. So there is a little bit of difference. The depth in Bethlehem House is not anywhere near the depth that we're talking here. But the interesting thing is, and again, not trying to pick pieces here, but there's a comment in the agenda that there's a overland flow path in the Bethlehem House development which makes it safe. That is clearly wrong. The overland flow path is the highest risk area of that development. So to say that, Bethlehem House, that's all good, it's only H3 and we've got a nice overland flow path, I beg to differ on that very seriously.
Councillor Basalt.
So just on the people that are likely to be living in this development, I understand it's got some provisions for some kind of supported disability type housing, and that the primary access for those people to get into the building on a normal average day would be via wheelchair accessible parking spots near the lifts in said car park. Is that correct?
Yes, but this is supported accommodation, so each of the apartments has a full-time carer, able-body, and again, so we've got a building manager, but we also have 2 people working and dealing in that space. So I forgot to mention that to you yesterday, but that with the under the SDA NDIS accreditation, they're the robust, so supported. The majority of them are sort of motor vehicle accidents or accidents where they're paralysed from the waist down or the waist up. So there is a full-time carer involved in them. So the risk on their particular side is, effectively zero, because when they arrive at the car park, when they go out, but a lot of the times they're assisted in and out of the car.
So do you have an indication then, given that you've mentioned that a lot of them are motor vehicle accidents that are suffering lower limb paralysis, roughly how long it would take to get a person out of or into a vehicle, even with a full-bodied carer?
Well, I'm not sure if you know David Cawthorne, affectionately known as Kenny, who is fighting the legal battle against the new government Parliament Square development, but he works as our advisor, and he's about 4.5 minutes unassisted. Assisted, he's 2 minutes in and out of the car. So But my key point going back to that, they would not be driving or in the car park if the weather conditions, we're talking Armageddon type conditions, and that's the really important part about it. I feel it's the only thing that's impacting on our development moving forward, and there is a very valid path to a solution which we'd like to be able to present further, because normally the types of systems that we'd be showing you, and I started my early life at Honeywell Control Systems, so I'm happy to get a system that can be shown to everybody, but that's normally what you expect in a BA session, not a DA session, but we would do it and prove, and so that's why I'm pushing that from a conditional based perspective. We can prove to everybody that there is a number of systems, that we would have a system that would, give a solution to everybody moving forward.
Yeah. So one of the, one of the other things is that it's possible to actually control the operation of the lift, as was talked about on Bethlehem House. So in an event where the management plan was triggered, someone from the upper level can't actually go to the car park to get out into that situation. And conversely, if the cable gate is up as well, their vehicle can't get into the car park to get stranded at the bottom of the lift.
Any other questions? No. Thank you guys so much. If you want to take your seats again, we'll get into debate. Did anyone have any points or questions for staff? Deputy.
Yeah, thank you. We've heard quite a lot from the applicant in relation to some of the things that have been reported in the second iteration. Can you perhaps add any clarity? Because obviously there are two perspectives here.
Well, look, we have a consultant hydraulic engineer, Joshua Coates, on the line, and maybe it's an opportunity for Joshua to comment in relation to that matter.
So sorry, the question was what's changed since the last question?
Well, I presume that you heard the applicant refuting some of the things that are in the report, and yes. So what essentially has changed? Can we be assured that the applicant is providing us with suitable information, or what do you feel? Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess from this latest piece of information I've received, they've expanded on the early warning system and included the reliance on warnings from the BOM and severe weather warnings. So that's essentially increasing the time available to enact the warning, which it's an okay approach, but it has its issues. But the key issue is it hasn't really addressed the hazard in the car park. That's the key, the item that I'm concerned about is that the high hazard in the car park. It's still there. You can enact emergency management plans, but I don't feel there's been enough done in investigating alternate options down in the car park. And there is issues with our floods, as in any change in that floodplain is likely to affect flood levels around the site. But I haven't actually seen anything to understand what that afflux is and whether or not an alternative option is appropriate. So that's, I guess, the key of what I'm looking at, that I haven't really been able to see.
Thank you.
Who's next?
Was there anything else to add from the director?
Well, we're going on the qualified advice in relation to this. Look, and I've said this before, there's a lot to like about this development. It is, the flood risk is an issue, and we are guided by, I suppose, the qualified advice. You've heard from the applicant, there are alternatives, but the concern is the risk, in certainly the advice that we're getting, that is still unacceptable from the qualified advice that we've received. Now, the applicant has indicated there are measures available. It's really a matter for the elected members to prepare to accept.
Councillor Dada and Councillor Harvey.
Just to follow up the question with regards to putting a condition, considering that it is quite risky, if you put a condition, will that be legally enforceable?
Well, yes, all planning conditions are legally enforceable. It's a question of how that, is there measures in place to ensure that that condition is continually enforced. There are challenges with that, as you know. We can't have an officer there to ensure that compliance is being met. That's a challenge.
Just another two questions. The other question that I have is seeking some clarification. Mention was made to Bethlehem House and the inaccuracies. Would you like to comment and clarify that, please?
I don't know whether Joshua can comment on that one.
No, sorry, I'm not familiar with the development or the type of behaviour.
Karen, can you?
Through you, Chair, I think the point is that the circumstances of each application is different. In the circumstances of Bethlehem House, an analysis was done and it was found that in those circumstances there were appropriate mitigation steps that could be taken to manage the risk. In this case, the view has been formed by both our staff and our consultant we've engaged that the mitigation measures aren't appropriate, and so they would not be addressed appropriately through a condition.
Thank you. And the final question through you, Chair, with regards to the issue of height. The focus has been on flooding and the management system. We haven't really spoken about the height. Here, there is still a difference of height from 10, which is allowed, as it were, to more than 10 or 20 plus. Will that create a problem still?
Well, the officers have clearly indicated that it doesn't comply with the performance criteria. There are some mitigating factors, however. It is located in topographically a low spot. It's shielded to some degree by existing trees on the adjacent road reserve. And it's certainly an area that we are reviewing as part of the Central Hobart Precinct Plan so far as building heights are concerned. We do appreciate that this is an area that should and could accommodate further housing opportunities and development opportunities. So we are in the process of, clearly, with the workshop last night, you would have realised that we were investigating changes with the current provisions in this location.
We've got Councillor Harvey and then Councillor Elliott.
Two questions. Firstly, if it wasn't for the flooding issue, would this have got an officer approval?
Look, it still may not have, because of the current provisions, but that's not to say the provisions coming out of the precincts plan might have allowed this to be approved.
Yep. All right, and second one is, if it's refused tonight, well, this is probably rhetorical questions if you're going to say no. We could definitely defend this in a tribunal.
Based on the qualified advice that I've got to take on board, yes, we would be able to defend it. That's not to say that that a tribunal mightn't necessarily agree with our defence.
Yep.
Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was Miss Abbey that you said that their views held that there aren't mitigation strategies or management strategies aren't viewed as being sufficient in this case. Do further strategies exist? Is there a solution that could be adopted?
Through you, Chair, we've had extensive conversations, and in our view there aren't. I mean, clearly that's not the view shared by the applicant, but it's our view that no, there are fundamental design changes that need to be made to make this building safe.
Thank you.
Councillor Basalt and then Alderman Bloomfield.
Two questions to the Director, through you, Chair. That I'll ask together because they've probably got the same answer, but the applicant relies on two arguments. One is assessment of the flooding risk using a WHS framework, a standard WHS framework, and the other area is this discrepancy about habitable versus non-habitable areas, the Australian Building Code versus the planning scheme. And I'm wondering if you can clarify for us tonight what our obligations are as the planning authority with regard to those two discrepancies.
Well, in terms of the discrepancy relating to the habitable area, we're confident that our interpretation is the correct one. I appreciate the arguments that have been put by the applicant, but it's fairly clear in the way that the provision is worded that constitutes a habitable building so far as the planning scheme is concerned. In relation to the risk assessment, I mean, I will again refer to Joshua to comment on that, but it's a widely held approach, is my understanding. Joshua?
Yes, so for this type of flooding, the really fast response and the risk, and when you have the opportunity, when you're looking at development, you should be looking at options where you can design out the risk. Ideally, flood emergency management plans are lower on the risk hierarchy, so they come later. So you would be aiming to reduce that risk with your development form where possible. And there's other things that you have to deal with, like afflux, if you're trying to raise levels, you block flow paths, to find balance to try and get something to work. It's a very challenging site.
Alderman Bloomfield.
On page 222 of this DA, section 7.9, they had originally quoted, the potential for facing liability is not a consideration which is relevant to the discretion which is caught up by the planning scheme and should not form part of an elected member's decision-making process. Is this inferring that we will not have responsibility if there is a flood event, or is this something different? I just wanted to understand where that kind of fitted into our considerations. Do we genuinely have?
Through you, Chair, the question was raised at the previous planning committee meeting about whether or not the council could potentially face a liability by approving this development. And we've considered that further. The Manager of Development Compliance has given her legal analysis of the situation, and the bottom line is possibly there could be some liability, but I've added in just to clarify that that's not something that should be taken into account when you're making the decision. You shouldn't think, well, the council might be liable, therefore I don't want to approve this application. You really need to focus on the provisions of the planning scheme and do your own analysis about whether or not this proposal satisfies, in your mind, what the scheme requires.
Deputy, and then I'll have a question myself.
Well, you have your question because I was going to move.
Oh, okay, yep. Just after a bit of clarity, I know Ms. Aby did say that in the eyes of the officers there wasn't really a foreseeable management plan that they thought would be enough to make this acceptable. Just after a bit of clarity around that, is it a matter of working on different presumptions as far as, I know we heard from the applicants that there was, a long lead-in time from the warning of these events to when the event actually hits, or when the safety hazard arises. With such a long lead-in time, I suppose going off what the applicants have said, with such a long lead-in time, would it not be reasonable to think that there could be a management plan that would ensure that the area is safe? And if not, why not? Or is it a matter of different presumptions as far as the lead-in time, or is it something more technical than that?
Look, I'd refer that one to Joshua.
Through you, Chair. An emergency management plan is always a So yes, ideally, most flood warning plans are based on larger systems, creeks, rivers. I think the proponent highlighted Maribyrnong River and Hobart Rivulet, which are long lead times where when you have rainfall, you can actually make informed decisions about flow and then understand what that means for your catchment and make decisions. The shorter you get and the less time you have available, you're working on the rush to begin with. And then with rainfall, there's a huge amount of variability whether that event will come or not, how severe it will be. Another item to add as well, this documentation has been noted is based on the 1% AEP, and it's pretty risky as we can see. Deep water, fast moving flow. There could be equally high risk for lesser AEPs and more frequent rainfall events. And that's another consideration as well, is how often is it actually going to happen?
So, just trying to pass what you just said, is that sort of implying that the sort of suggested lead time from warning to the event hitting the site of multiple hours, is that not something you'd find correct, or it would be correct?
It's hard to know how reliable these warning systems are. They're thunderstorms. I'm sure you've all seen severe weather warnings that have been issued by the government. It's a good approach to give you an idea of what could happen, but you don't really know how severe that impact will be.
Okay.
And whether or not it will catch all events either. And I can't really talk to the reliability of the bomb, what their product is. My experience is more related to emergency management plans related to river level gauges. So that's the more common approach to flood emergency management.
Thank you. Deputy.
Chairman, I will move the officer's recommendation for refusal based on those conditions. I feel, like it's almost. I think the applicants are doing what they can in relation to mitigation and putting forward various suggestions. However, it's almost like things haven't caught up with where we could be. I do have a considerable concern about the safety of people who are quite vulnerable. Potentially vulnerable residences with poor mobility in a situation like this as well, despite them perhaps having 24-hour carers and assistance. There are situations where that doesn't always occur, unfortunately. So we're looking at obviously worst case scenarios. I think there are concerns in relation to some of the building itself in regard to that area as well, just in relation to I think it was the height, which is the wall length and that sort of displacement of overland flows, which is there as well. So move the recommendation for refusal, and really, it is partly because it's such a difficult site. So very unfortunate, but just don't think that I can support it for approval.
Thank you, Deputy. Who's next? Councillor Basalt.
Sure. Look, I'll be supporting that motion from Deputy Lord Mayor. I think that it's a terrific development. It's a much needed development. The height, although not in the current planning scheme, will come close to what we potentially understand the Central Hobart's precinct plan to look like, and given the topographic nature of the site, which unfortunately is what's causing the flood issue, in my view, the height and the bulk of the building is not a massive problem. But I just can't give this the rubber stamp because the risk is too high, in my view. Despite attempts at mitigation, there's issues with ongoing maintenance and compliance, even if they install a mitigation system such as this. 12 months from down the track, there's no way that we can enforce that to continue working. And I also note the typical human behaviour and what the likelihood is of the likely behaviour of a human when given the advice that their second greatest value asset is under threat. And in my assessment, I would suggest that if you're told that the car park is about to flood and your car is in the car park, you're more likely to go to the car park. So there's a whole, and there's also the false alarm problem, which is mentioned in the agenda, which is that the Bureau of Meteorology does their best, but of course there are false alarms for storms such as the exemplar given by the applicant on the East Coast that never eventuated. And it's much harder to plan because of the topographic nature of the mountain and its proximity to the river in Hobart, and understand the modelling as well as in a big Western New South Wales context or something like that, where you have a storm rolling across a desert. So I just feel that the risk is far, far too high on on the flooding component alone. But again, I invite the applicant to come back with a redesign, because I do really want to see this building built.
Thank you, Councillor Basalt. Anybody else? Oh no, once that's done, there's no comments from the gallery. Sorry, Councillor Elliott.
I will be foreshadowing a motion for approval of this one, as I did in the last time this came to the table. From a scale and stepping point of view, I'm comfortable with it. I think this will become the new norm. From the flood perspective, whilst there's definitely risks there, I do think that there's solid risk management in place, and importantly that technology in this space with alerts and response systems and things like that will only be improving, and I would have a fair degree of confidence in the organisation being aware of their liability and wanting to manage reputation and keeping up with technology in that regard and their duty of care. Also, the 24 hours site manager I find comforting, as well as the fact that the people with caring needs would be assisted. And I think overall that it's definitely risks, but I think that once those risks have had their management strategies applied, that the benefit outweighs it. So overall, yeah, foreshadowing motion for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Any other comments by anybody? Councillor Dutta.
Thank you, Chair. It's my responsibility as a planning authority, putting that hat on, to look at this application on the current provisions of the plan. Now, we have heard many a time that we ought to go along with the professional advice given to us, and yet sometimes we make the statement we don't abide by it. We are entitled to disagree. That is the right we have as elected members. But for me, it is my responsibility here is to look at it analytically and critically to see how I can support this application. And I was very happy to go along with the last time when we allowed more time for discussion so that we would find a solution to this, but it has come back to us. Now, the fact that it has come back to us and there has been no change, I need to ask myself, now, under the planning scheme, why am I refusing this? So firstly, the clause that I look at is clause 15.4 1A1 P1 with regards to height. Now, there is a thinking or planning that in the future we'll be able to change the height for that particular area. But at present, the planning scheme we have that we should use as a test does not in any way allow us to do that. And so therefore, according to acceptable solution A1 and P1, this does not satisfy. Again, if you look at the three other clauses mentioned, clause 7, clause 15, clause 15.7, 5A, all those clauses, when I look at it critically and analyze it, I have difficulty not agreeing with the applicant, but I am more inclined here to agree with the recommendations made by staff. So that's one. The provisions are not met quite clearly. Point number two, we also have the UDAP, who looks at it with their professional eyes and make recommendations. And I have read in the report that they are also very concerned and they do not support this. That is another point that I have to take into consideration, having looked at the fact that it does not meet the provisions of the planning scheme. And thirdly, I've also looked at the advice given to us by the external hydraulic engineer, and it clearly says it's not compliant with the storm water code. And again, when I look at that and I weigh the argument, I am happy to support that argument presented to me, and hence I would support the motion put forth by the deputy. Thank you.
Councillor Dutta, or anybody else? Councillor Harvey.
Similar but much shorter than Alderman Dutta. Councillor Dutta. Look, the officer's recommendation stands out as well as the expert advice. So I've got to go with the expert advice in this instance, as much as I would like to approve this development because I think it's quite a reasonable development. There were still 31 objections to the current development as well, I'll just remind people, but I do think it was quite a reasonable development, but based on expert advice, I'll be supporting officer's recommendation for refusal, unfortunately.
Thank you. Anybody else? Lowbagger.
Just wanted to echo the last two speakers. I think this is a fantastic proposal, but I just find that I can't support it based on the officer's advice, and especially the external expert advice. I would echo Councillor Harvey there and hope that it does come back to us in a form that's more acceptable. Thank you.
Anybody else? No, look, I'll just be quick. Look, I don't have too much issue with the issue with the massing of the building. Obviously, the issue is more about the stormwater here. I appreciate all the advice we've been given. I do think that, given the nature of the site, I think if as was said, the technological availabilities that we have as far as warnings, as far as management systems, I can't, whether or not what's being proposed is appropriate, but I can't see that we couldn't, or the applicants couldn't be made to provide some sort of management system that would give that warning to ensure that those car parks aren't occupied during severe weather events. I think a large part of this comes down to a definitional issue of whether or not a car park is a what's the term, occupied space, habitable space. I don't think people personally I don't think people habitate in car parks, but that's neither here nor there. I think if we were talking about residential floors, I think I'd be having a very different opinion on this. But we're talking about car parks, and I think there's definitely whether or not it's what's being proposed or not, I think there's definitely a solution that can be arrived to. And as has been said by a number of people here, aside from this particular issue, it's a fantastic development, and it'd be sad to see this not go ahead. But look, given the debate around the room, it seems unlikely it'll get approved tonight, but I do hope that it does come back to us. But I won't be supporting the officer's recommendation, and I'd be more inclined to support the foreshadowed. But I'll leave it there if there's no other comment. No.
Look, I've got a comment to make, if I may.
Alderman Zerko.
Look, I spoke about this at the last meeting, and I just want to make this point. If anyone has apartments in Melbourne that has underground car parking, that doesn't necessarily have a floodplain, during the last floods in Melbourne, they were all inundated with water. I don't see this any different to that. The whole thing about it is we know it's a floodplain, we know there are issues, the developer has got contingency plans in overcoming that. If it was the apartments that were going to be flooded, I'd have concerns, but when it just comes to the car park and they're going to be warning aspects to it, I don't see an issue. So, look, I think we all also have to look at a number of underground car parks that we have in some of our apartments. So give consideration to that. This is no different to an underground car park. I'll just leave it at that.
That's it. I'll move the officer's recommendations as, I'll put the officer's recommendations as moved by the Deputy Lord Mayor. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. No. Show of hands, all those in favour.
Councillor Dutta, Councillor Harvey, Deputy Lord Mayor.
And against?
Councillor Bloomfield, Order of Baracus. Carried 5-4.
Thank you. So that's well, the motion's carried, so it's not approved. So we'll thank you for your patience on that one. We'll move on to the next item, which will go back to 6.1.1, which is 410 St John's Avenue, Newtown. That up. Councillor Harvey and then Councillor Dutta.
I'm happy to move the item. I think it looks like the bowls club's not doing that well, so I'd be quite happy to see a couple of netball courts there, which might be better used. How is the bowls club travelling? Not relevant to the application, I guess.
No, not necessarily, Chair, but I think it's not uncommon. We have seen number of bowls club reduce or go out of business, so to speak, or reduce their number of rinks that are available. It's interesting to note there is a bowls club just further in St John's itself. So there are a number of facilities within the immediate area, so it's not surprising.
Time for some amalgamation of bowls clubs. Happy to move the item though.
Okay, we've got Councillor Dutta, and then
Thank you.
Oh, you're all good. Deputy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll support this. I know that it's been in the pipeline for a very long time with this whole sports precinct upgrade, and it's surplus to the bowling greens, surplus to requirements, and obviously the Netball Association is always pressed for space. So I think it's obviously the heritage issues have been addressed, or like it's still sport in that area, so that's quite a good thing. And I just think it's going to be of benefit for something which is really underutilised. It'll be really heavily utilised once it is built, subject to approval.
Councillor Passal.
Yep, briefly, it's great to see more sporting facilities going in. I think this is a good temporising measure, but I would really just like to voice in an official setting that I think that we need to have a better look at St John's Park as a whole, which I know we don't own, but to have a chat to the state government about how we get the best out of that site. Because I do note that in the sporting precinct that you mentioned, that parking and the constraints of the sites are major issues that are brought up there. So, but yeah, absolutely supportive of this. Fantastic stuff.
Through you, Chair, is there already not a master plan on the Boyle for this area?
It's so if I may, through you, Chair, that is for the corner that we are responsible for, which is the sporting precinct. But I'd like to see, it's a 10-acre site. I'd like to see a grand master plan for the entirety of St John's Park. Yeah, underutilised peri-urban space. Thanks, Chair.
Any other comments? No, I'll move that. I'll put that as moved by Councillor Harvey. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. Carried. Very good. Nice one, it's easy. Move to 6.1.2, 487, 489 Sandy Bay Road. Let's kick this one off. Councillor Passal.
I'll move the officer's recommendation for refusal.
Any questions or comments? Nope. All right. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no. It's carried. Very good. Okay, we now move to reports. So we've got the 7.1 advertised applications report.
So moved.
Anything to comment on, Ms Abbey?
Thank you, Chair. I will draw a couple of items to the attention of the committee. The first is item number 7 on the list, which is 87 Goulburn Street. That is has previously been a laundromat, and it's proposed to turn that into a cafe by day and restaurant by night, I guess. That one does technically fall within officer delegations, but at officer level, we think that that one would be worthy of being determined by the elected members. So that's currently heading its way to the next agenda.
They're keeping a few washing machines.
I don't know.
Yeah. Cafe, laundromat, another one. Yeah.
Number 19 on the list, 75 Lansdowne Crescent, has a number of representations and will also be on the next agenda for the Planning Committee.
Very good. So who moved that? Councillor Harvey. Any other comments or questions? No. I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Against say no. Carried unanimously. 7.2 Delegated Decisions Report.
So, move.
Data, any comments or questions? Going once, going twice? No, move that. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. Carried. Questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? No?
No.
Very good. Can we get someone to move that we close the open and open the close?
I move.
Councillor Dutta. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against say no.